Welcome to another Draft Physics presentation. Yes, Ken Wheeler again. Just for fun and for some, just comparison purposes. Trying to put into rational perspective maybe some of the points he's trying to make into some sort of, something more reasonable, and illustrate how he's, he's 1/10 right, or whatever, 25% right about something. And now if he just, toned it down a bit and was a little more receptive to reason, that, yes, he might actually be able to make a coherent argument. I suppose my will is to attempt to talk to the etherists and explain how what they're describing isn't that far removed from any system that creates pressure, and that they should describe their ether essentially as a randomized pressure. And it would work a lot better. But I know they don't want to go anywhere near a particle, and that's the part where I think they're just not getting it. The universe really is a big box of energetic sand. Little bits moving around really fast and a lot in all kinds of directions. And that's the pressure, and the matter bits mediate the pressure. It's really that simple. So anyway, they filter it. Matter's a filter. So we'll start around the 8-minute mark here, and he talks about some things, and then we'll draw some pictures and such.
Concentration of electrostatic energy would be at its center. This tells you something of the four field modalities that we think are autonomous, but which are not. There's only one thing. There's only the dielectric, i.e. the ether.
So the dielectric, the ether, using these different words for the same thing in a kind of complicated way. This dielectric, what does that even mean? I mean, it has a definition in physics that he doesn't use. A dielectric is a substance. There's no, it's in a material substance. The shape of the chemistry creates a dielectric, not something else.
Ether. What is the ether itself? Well, it's nothing unless disturbed. Right?
Okay, it's nothing unless disturbed. I mean, you can't disturb a nothing, so, isn't this just playing silly word games? I mean, nothing if not disturbed just doesn't mean anything. It's nothing. But you can disturb it. Come on.
Disturbed, then of course we have manifestation, either as a dielectric.
And then we have manifestation as a dielectric. So when the ether is disturbed, we have manifestation as ether, because ether is dielectric. So the ether is nothing. The ether is disturbed. It turns into dielectric, which is the same thing as ether. So the disturbance didn't do anything. Oh, okay.
Necessitatively so, according to the...
Necessitatively so. This is, we all have our little bits of jargon. I mean, I say jargon kind of often. So we all have words and phrases that we use a lot and built into our personality. But, this whole denotatively so and connotative, I mean, it's, it doesn't say anything as rhetoric.
Formula, which is my discovery, here tattooed on the
yes.
my wrist, by the way,
bias,
is the magnetic,
which
is the dielectric field, denotatively and connotatively.
So denotatively and connotatively, which, again, just more assertions that we've defined it and we've established it, and it's established by the establishment. And the establishment is the counter space. That's really the ether, established it by some edict of the ether when it was perpetrated into doing so, because the nothing can't really establish anything. I mean, it's just such gibberish.
Creation of time and space. The one thing that gives unity to everything in the universe as meant phenomena.
Okay, as meant phenomena, whatever that means. So you don't see, he could take out all these adjectives maybe and it would help. Meant phenomena. You could just say as phenomena. Meant phenomena. What does that mean? They either meant to do it. Does the ether have free will?
Is magnetism.
Okay, so then he says it's magnetism, and then he just starts talking about electricity. So another, gigantic irony thingy, contradiction, paradoxical foible, I don't know, but there's just no point. Either establish something or don't establish something as the origin. But it just switches from electricity to magnetism, back and forth as the source.
Nothing has existence or unity, and by the way, existence literally means existence, to be a...
Existence. So again, we can't know what the word existence means by just establishing that we can tell the thing something from nothing. And we can't do that. We need a word definition to establish that for us. So depending on how the word was originally intended to be used by some person who didn't even know what a bacterium was, didn't know what empty space was, didn't know what a vacuum was, didn't know what anything was, I'm supposed to take that 4,000-year-old description of a word and say that's what the word really is, and I can't apply any kind of reasoning and say, yes, as a modern man, I know the difference between the space and the moon. Those are two different things. Space and moon, two different things.
Side of oneself, which is denotatively magnetism or appearance, i.e. mass and magnitude.
Mass and magnitude. So again, it's just more over jargoned. You could have just used one of those words, mass or substance. But even the word magnitude doesn't even, what is that? Magnitude is a variable concept. It isn't a thing. Something doesn't have magnitude. Magnitude, you either have a little bit of something or a lot of something. And if you have a lot of something, you start calling it magnitude.
Time does not exist. There's only one fundamental particle. We know for a fact that...
Okay, there's only one fundamental particle. Now, why he said this, I have no clue. Because he doesn't believe in any particles. So why did he say it? What does it mean, there's only one fundamental particle? How can that mean something?
That actually... But this part is theoretical.
Like everything isn't, that you say. So he establishes all these things as facts and does all this talking, and then says something. Well, this part's only theoretical. What? By whom? Whose theory? What theory?
If you actually take like gamma radiation, which is up in the realm of 5 or 6 electrovolts. It's somewhere
5 or 6 or 50 or 10, 60 or you could change the number here.
Theoretically, it should be the threshold of 50 or possibly higher electrovolts.
Yes, or a million or 500 million, whatever.
Well, we would actually have a stable form of
I think they have to be called electron volts or something, but whatever, who cares? The idea of establishing voltage based on what would produce something like that kind of radiation is more interesting than saying it has the voltage. It's the byproduct of the admission.
Magnetism, which would be the fundamental particle being...
Okay, the fundamental particle is electromagnetism. Well, let's do that again because he's saying there's a particle again, so let's play with that.
Magnetism.
Okay, well, that didn't go far enough.
Volts. Well, we would actually have a stable form of electromagnetism, which would be the fundamental particle being...
Which would be the fundamental particle. So, again, now we're supposed to be thinking in terms of ether, and now he's talking about a fundamental particle. Then he didn't call it a perturbation, so it's not illumination. Clearly, you could argue that if you're going to do this physics thing, then I think you ought to get grounded on some concepts like photon is kind of like the smallest bit of energy kind of a thing. The discrete corpuscle that would be something like a photon is, any variety of them. And again, I've explained why the difference between the gamma ray or the X-ray and the radio wave merely has to do with the fact that there's more of them per unit of time. So it's like the difference between shooting your 9mm every half second and using a machine gun or a Gatling gun. Yes, obviously the machine gun can do more damage because the bullets are coming faster, more often, more frequently, and so they take advantage of the tipping point argument that I've made over and over again. See, it'd be nice if this was more interactive and Ken could respond to those points and realize that, oh yes, I see what you're saying. It isn't in the nature of the bullet that is more powerful or more magnitude. It is just in the fact that you're moving them you're having them impact more rapidly. Rapidity of rapidity, I'll use a fancy word, of impact is the force mediation. That is how force is conveyed to something, is by tapping on it more often. To use another word abused by some.
Spit out, for example, that we see in super high energy galactic jets. Galactic jets, by the way, are these gyromagnetic precessive.
I don't think there's any evidence of geomagnetic precessive. I think there's evidence of rays. So again, but whatever.
Emissions. These polar emissions that are shooting out trillions and trillions of tons of hydrogen, which hydrogen is just a fundamental particle.
So again, we have another fundamental particle. And clearly hydrogen is not a fundamental particle because it's got a big giant nucleus that's got parts in it that are quite identifiable. It's proton and electron. So again, not quite right. Helium nucleuses are not particles. They're a collection of particles.
The proton, the fundamental particle, the universe, the building.
Okay, so the proton is now the fundamental particle, even though the electron is smaller, by mass anyway. But who knows about that being the truth anyway. But clearly the two, the proton and the electron, are fundamental in that they create all the charge and all the interesting bits that create magnetism and electricity. So I mean, they're the fundamental particles to electricity.
Block of everything. So we only have one particle, and we only have one field.
So we only have one particle, and it's something like a proton. So is that what we're cut down to? So the proton is the fundamental particle, and the ether pushes the protons around. That's how the universe works. I think that's way undercooked as a theory. I thought there was something in gravity here. Maybe I have to go back further because I really wanted to explain the gravity part, but we'll see where it goes.
Field modality. That field modality is the dielectric. And the dielectric is the only field modality.
So when he says dielectric, he's saying ether, right? We already established that the dielectric is the ether, so why not just say ether? We use one word, quit confusing the subject by throwing in these different words. Just use the one word, make it simple. Perturbated, disturbed ether is dielectric. So the dielectric is the disturbed ether. So when something is in the ether, it's disturbed, and therefore it's dielectric.
At the center of which concentration is existence. At the center of magnetism, by the way, this is not my opinion. This is.
By the way, this is not my opinion. I love when he throws those in, like it all isn't somehow tainted by his opinion. Because even when he's describing somebody else's opinion, he does it so badly that you know, it's his opinion. He's only fighting with his opinions of his opinions. He's not fighting with any other real thing in the real world. He's debating his own, again, straw man of reality.
The fact. At the center of any magnetic field, there is no magnetism. At the center of any gravitational field, gravity does not exist. There is.
So gravity doesn't exist, except he talks about like it's existing. At the center of gravity, there's no gravity but the gravity doesn't exist anyway. So let's not even talk about this. It doesn't exist. You know, photons don't exist. Nothing exists except, oh no, it exists. It's just we don't call it that. We call it special. Special Jimmy. Jimmy. Yeah, we don't use the regular terms. So this is the important part, actually.
Zero gravity. It's not my opinion. This is just a goddamn fact.
Right, and it's really an important fact. It's another fact in support of not, you know, certainly my theory, but I mean it's one of these facts that both you and regular physics should really think about, because it sort of points out that there's no ether on the inside. There's just ether on the outside, so to speak, and that the ether is actually doing something. It's not just dead. It's not nothing until perturbated. It's not nothing until disturbed. The ether is already disturbed. It's in an insanely disturbed state, and that's why there is gravity. So again, I will make the simple drawing explanation for how you ether people ought to be looking at this. Oh, sorry, I didn't have the video playing. Well, you know, my bad. Mostly my bad. I could blame it on Laura or something, but no, it's probably me. It's right there. It's your fault. It's okay. All right. Yeah, waste time fixing the camera, asshole. Okay, enough of that. Anyway, gravity. So the idea is that if you could make a gravitational body and you could just give it a skin, okay, you would have zero gravity in here because the gravity would always be equal from each side. The amount of mass, if you thought of it as an external force, the external force would be blocking the same amount of stuff no matter where you go in here. And as you change the distance, you end up increasing the exposure to the gravity. So let's say, this isn't too hard to understand, so you should be able to understand it. If I was really close to this surface, my exposure to gravity coming this way would be minimal. Okay, and my real exposure is just going to be to this gravity. So it'll have a certain intensity, a 10 or whatever. And this would be a 10 here, but I'm all way far away from it, so I'm a further distance from it. But by being further away, I'm exposed to all these other angles of gravity. So all of these transmissions through matter, that's what it really comes down to, is the force being filtered by matter. So from over here, I'm exposed to a lot more force being filtered through the matter, and here I'm exposed to a lot less, but it's more intense. And it just turns out that that always remains equal. No matter where you go in here, that'll always remain equal. That the amount you diminish the force by moving away from it will be in proportion to the lack of force you'll be exposed to as you get closer to a surface. And so it is a very interesting fact, and it just points. I mean, there's no realistically, there's no other way to explain this phenomenon than this external force argument. It has to be an external force. And as he states, this is a fact physics acknowledges. Conventional physics acknowledges that there's no gravity in the center of the Earth. That, you're done. It runs out. If you could make a tube through the Earth, they'll acknowledge that as you fall, your acceleration will decrease, and then has to, because your momentum is going to change, you're going to have velocity, so you'll pass right through that point. But I'm just saying, if you could stop right there in the middle, you wouldn't move in any direction anymore. You would just stay there in the middle. So they acknowledge there's no force there. So they acknowledge this ring argument. They acknowledge it, and it screams, okay, external force causing the phenomenon. It's a complete winner as an argument. So why play a game? So Ken's basically saying this is your pressure, right? You have pressure of the ether, and that's why there's no electricity inside the coil, and that's why there's no magnetism inside the center of the magnet, is because, yes, the magnet is a filter, and if you go to some center point in it, you won't be affected by it. Now, I don't think it's true inside of a magnet in the sense that you do have the two, obviously you have the two different poles, so the center of a magnet is always going to be the evenness of what you're going to get hit by. You're certainly, the left to right argument might be difficult. I don't know, you have to make a spherical magnet, and you can't really do that because the poles are always going to be a bias on that sphere. So I don't think you can make the same exact argument for a magnet. But anytime you're creating a filter, like when you have a coil, so if we just imagine this as coils of wire going around this, it's the same phenomena, the same argument, is that once you've magnetized it, you've just turned it into a filter. And that's really all it's doing. And it's going to filter the energy. Now, the added bonus feature of the universe is that there's two kinds of force. There's the proton force and the electron force. And that means that if you do have a magnet, if you do magnetize something, polarize it, and for the sake of this argument, well, we technically have to polarize it down this middle. But anyway, then we have a red side and a black side. Then it will be red filtered in the center and black filtered on the outside, which means everything that comes in mixed, it will leave the filter. So let's always understand, gravity goes through stuff mostly. Let me put that the right way. When it's creating magnetism, it's creating it not by absorbing force. That's why only other magnets react to magnets. Is because the same amount of force goes through them. They don't move like in gravity because they're not automatically absorbing some amount of the force. Well, they obviously are because they're moving. See, the complexity is it's the same exact force creates gravity and magnetism. And you just have to understand the consequence of it being filtered. So it's already absorbs a certain amount, but you can obviously understand that it's absorbing it from all directions evenly. So it doesn't move, theoretically, in empty space. Now, if I put it on the surface of the Earth, a magnet moves just like any material object because it's going to absorb a certain percentage, because the Earth itself has already absorbed. A bunch of these arrows don't exist because the Earth absorbed them. And so there's more arrows up here than there's down here, so it falls down. Now, the magnetic part is just a filtering, so that just means that the arrows go through one way and they are diverted. So all the red ones come out one end and all the black ones come out the other end. So it's not consuming any force until another magnet shows up and these forces start hitting each other. The other magnet starts reacting to this magnet and they start throwing this polarized force back and forth, because the black force will reflect off the electrons, the red force will reflect off the protons, meaning very high pressures can be created. So again, the point is this is how you create pressure in the universe, and how you get matter to mediate it, and how when you have two different polarizations, a proton and an electron, two mechanisms of charge, that you can have very complex arrangements created where you have very complex geometry of objects that are charged being in relationship to each other. So these would be repelling, and these would be attracting, and these would be repelling, and, and you can create very complex geometry based on those repulsions and attractions. And so this model gives you a perfectly working mechanism. And the only reason I would argue, okay, so you can say if you want to make an ether, I could agree. We could just agree on terms that ether has to be. It doesn't do what water does. So he keeps talking about something waving and making waves in water, like photons are waves in water, and they're not really like that at all. They don't spread. They don't go wider and wider. They don't do any of that stuff. They're rays of photons, and that's something proved by physics. I mean, the fact that it's corpuscular has been proven by so many different experiments where you just knock it down to just one photon, and you can see it travels the shortest distance between 2 points, and there's just no doubt that it's in the form of a ray. It's not in the form of a spreading wave. So you can't have a medium that has tension like water molecules that are stuck to each other. You have to have a medium that's a bunch of free little bits of sand or something. And so that we're getting very close to a particle, aren't we? So he just said, and he said it twice in this video, the fundamental particle. Clearly the fundamental particle isn't the proton. The fundamental particle is making the protons move and making the electrons move. The fundamental particle is the photon, okay? The graviton, the magneton. They're all the same tons, they're just coming at different arrangements. So when they're coming at a frequency, we recognize them as a specific frequency. We recognize it as the electromagnetic spectrum. And if they're close together, we'll call it a gamma ray, and if they're far apart, we'll call them a radio wave, and that's all that is. And the ones that don't have a frequency and are of mixed color, you know, proton red is in there, those would be, you know, the rest of the field energy. Obviously a magnet is creating all red from one, all proton force from one side, and all electron force from the other side. So that's pretty clear. And gravity is just all of that mixed together. So it's yin-yanging. That's why it has no magnetic component that's obvious, or significant. Is because there's nothing to, you're getting as much of the red as you are the black, so it's not magnetically significant as a force. It's not biased in empty space. You have to give it a bias by creating a filter that creates the bias. And the filters are what are mediating the pressure. But I'm just saying, for you ether people, what else? This is it, okay? The pressure is being created by the external field of energy, and it's just trying to figure out, well, what's the likely explanation for what that field is made out of. And this idea of making it out of a bound, you know, gluey substance doesn't work, because most of the energy can be seen to be moving in rays, in very straight line vectors, and all of the math supports that. So, you know, there's a point where you have to make it, you know, you're just going to, you really should, you know, open your mind a little and say, okay, I got to accept that ether is particulates of ether. That it's, if you still don't want to make it a real thing, you still don't want to make it material, it's okay with me. You can make them little sparkies or something. I don't care. But just understand that that's what's creating the pressure, is those little things hitting stuff. And they do hit stuff and get absorbed by stuff. They have a magnitude, and that magnitude, when it's in motion, conveys motion. It will cause something else to acquire the motion. Alright, that's probably enough of that. Maybe I could do probably more, but I'll spare you. Sort of generous that way. So sorry I didn't have the right image on for that whole video thingy.
A hardcore, damn fact. At the center of an electromagnetic perturbation, the longitudinal pulse perturbations of the dielectric transverse electron.
Okay, so the longitudinal is a really great word, but this transverse stuff, you don't need any of this. So ironically, as much contempt as he has for conventional physics, apparently some of his heroes believed in this two-wave thing, you know, that it's doing this and it's doing this at the same time, when that's all just an abstract image made by mathematical assumptions. It doesn't have anything to do with any physical evidence. There's absolutely no physical evidence that anything in the electromagnetic spectrum can be moved by magnetism or electricity. There's just no evidence that it could give a shit. And yet they think it's made of that. I mean, that should be another glaring thing that just says, no, just ignore that transverse crap. This has nothing to do with anything transversing. It has to do with something going in a straight line. It's not transversing its way through the straight line.
Magnetic. There is no electricity at the center of that. Electricity?
Well, I mean, there'd be no way to even describe how there could be electricity at the center of a photon. So he's just describing the motion of a photon and saying there's no electricity at the center of that. Well, of course there wouldn't be, because it is the electricity. The photon is the thing creating the pressure that makes the electron move, and it's the movement of the electrons that it's the pressure between the electrons that we call voltage. And their migration through that pressure being pushed is what we call amperage.
Is magnetism and dielectricity working in?
Okay, so magnetism and ether, right? Dielectricity is the ether, once it's disturbed. So disturbed ether and magnetism. So this doesn't say anything.
The hybrid unity.
A hybrid unity. So so I mix dielectricity, which is disturbed ether, with something called a magnetism, and I have some sort of hybrid something or other. I mean, how does this work for you people as an explanation of anything? I mean, it's a sincere question. How does your brain say, yes, that's it? How does it do that? Because I can't possibly, it is so bizarrely inarticulate and without any structure, I can't make anything out of it at all.
It is what electricity is. The easiest way to explain how electromagnet works is to simply fundamentally explain what the hell electricity is.
So he just said magnetism was the game, and then he goes, now electricity is the game. So if you understand electricity, then you understand magnetism. When it's supposed to be the other way around, because magnetism is supposed to be the elemental function, and electricity is supposed to be the built on top of function. So he's doing that one backwards. So what do I want to say about that? Yes, the thing to understand about it is to understand magnets are filtering the, what do you call the perpetuated ether? The dielectricity. Okay? Magnets are just filtering it. They're not making it. They're not doing anything else. They're just causing the dielectricity to separate into two forces. Electron affecting, proton affecting.
People understand that. Hey, by losing the dielectric components of the electrical field, the only thing that is left is the
dielectric component of the electrical field. So the ether component, right? Dielectric is ether. That doesn't make any sense. Get rid of the ether component. You don't have any parts left, I don't think.
Magnetic. This is how electromagnet works. Oh my God, it makes so much sense now that I know what.
I mean, so again, so you people who just clap and applaud, wow, that was just great. I totally great physics. You understand that. That's all you need to hear. You got it. You got this great mental image of how the universe flows, how the pressure moves. I just don't see how it's possible to do that. I think it's functionally impossible. If there was a truth-telling machine and we could put a little screen up to your brain and find out whether it actually has any kind of notion at all in its head, I don't think it has any notion. I think you're just looking for God, and that's all it's going to say is God, or some kind of magic, fun, perpetuating. I mean, there's not going to be any model of reality.
Electricity is. The point fundamentally of this entire video
is to confuse stupid people and make yourself look like you're smarter than them because you confuse them. See, I know when somebody's confusing me, they're probably just full of shit. But a lot of people aren't smart enough to know that. So when somebody confuses them, they go, wow, they must be really smart because I'm confused.
Is that there is only one particle.
Said it again. It seems amazing that he keeps saying it, but he keeps saying it. And it's the proton. So a proton without the electron is like a magnet, you know, with just south pole. I mean, the proton and the electron are the magnetic monopoles. See, this is the kind of thing where these ether guys could really gain some traction if they realized that simple truth, because that'd be a great argument to make against conventional physics. Like, why didn't you realize this obvious fact that the electron and the proton are obviously the magnetic monopoles? Obviously.
There is only one field. There is not.
All right, one field of proton energy. Now, as I've pointed out, you know, you really can't. Even if I was to concede your ether argument, your ether still has to have this element in it that can be extracted as plus and minus. It still has to have charge in it somewhere. This charge is a real thing. So you're still going to be short. Because I went through the process, okay? I mean, I did the whole gravity argument. I figured out gravity, and then I was stuck because I couldn't turn gravity into magnetism and electricity because there wasn't any way to do it. There wasn't any mechanism. You know, until you realize that, oh, I don't have to be glued to having one kind of elemental bit in the universe. I can have two, on, off, square, round. I can have two, no problem. And once you have two, then you have a checkerboard. Then you have black squares and red squares. Then you have black checkers and red checkers. Then you have a game. No problem. If you have all red checkers and all red squares, you can sort of get it. Hey, this game isn't going to go anywhere. But you have two colors and two colors, then you got a game.
Water and ice and steam. There's only water. we can't speak of these things as that we recognize them as something autonomous only due to their attributional interaction.
Autonomous based on their attributional interaction. Yes, things are in different states. So yes, the simple argument is red light has a a wider wavelength, distance between the corpuscles than blue light. Simple argument. Same thing, different arrangement. Same thing with ice and steam and water vapor and liquid water. Yes, same fact, that it arranges differently depending on the external conditions.
And our observation thereof, but they are not something separate. Anybody with 5 brain cells knows that water and steam and ice are all the same goddamn thing, don't they? Yet physicists and these mental midget...
So this is all straw man, right? Like somehow physicists don't know that they're all the same thing. Yes, they do. They do know it's all an H2O molecule. They do know that. So this is just straw man rubbish as an argument.
Knuckle-dragging pseudo-intellectual morons with PhDs, these empiricists, these atomists, these quantum cultists.
Again, all of this rhetoric to insult people who have, certainly in my case, enough integrity to defend what they argue, you know, where you don't, coward. And they'll give you a pretty complex model. I mean, conventional physics does have lots of mathematics and other kind of bullshit to back up, and very, very strange experiments, some of them I'll have to concede. I mean, a lot of assumptions built into them. But they also have a ton, a volume of experiments that have been done all the way back to Galileo's time that are really hard evidence of things. And all of those experiments aren't being explained by you at all. You're just ignoring their existence as evidence of rays, for example.
You think that Mother Nature's a cross-eyed hooker on crack with a...
So again, the same line where, yes, I would agree that their theories have way too much complexity in the checkerboard. The checkerboard is a mess. Okay, so they got some of the idea that it's more like a chessboard. Okay, and so yes, they have something right. They have knights and bishops, but you know, they've got emperors instead of kings, and they got, you know, dictators instead of queens, and they got all kinds of weird shit on the board. So yeah, it's not really, they don't got the game drawn up right at all, and they have way too many different kinds of things. I mean, they don't just have a bunch of pawns. They have like 100 different kinds of pawn, and you know, it's really just, they're just pieces of a pawn. It's like a pawn's leg and a pawn's arm and a pawn's head. It's just, you know, and they're thinking those are whole pawns, and they're putting them on the square like it's a whole person still, even though they blew it to pieces. So they're just putting body parts on the board saying, oh, those are active pawns. Well, no, they're not really.
Bag of magical particles, all of which are different and bumping around. The universe doesn't work that way. I
would agree. All of those zillions of extra shit they made, their whatever positrons and their anti-thises and all this shit that only exists in accelerators, doesn't exist in the real universe, doesn't interact in the real universe. It's all just a pile of rubbish. It doesn't have anything to do with the basic functions. It's just garbage.
The universe is field pressure mediation.
There you go. That's you got it. Bingo. And what's the pressure caused by? Things hitting other things. Whether you want to call it dielectricity or whatever, it's clearly in corpuscular forms, and it hits things. So why ignore something so frickin' obvious in all the experiments done? It's full of something goes where the other thing is, and they interact. And they can interact in different ways. As I've pointed out, the photons clearly interact in a big way with an electron. Okay, something major happens. But if there's an electron and an electron, they clearly bend off of each other because they're emitting force. The photon isn't emitting any force. So the photon just doesn't bend around things or off things. Photons hit or do not hit, but they do not bounce.
Everything is electrical. Everything is permittivity.
Okay, so everything was magnetism before. Now everything's electricity. See what I mean by, you know, this isn't. You people have to concede this is no way to run a railroad. You know, you don't switch the tracks like this and, oh, you know, well, we're going west. No, go east, young man. No, go west, young man. No, go east, young man. I mean, come on. This is herky-jerky bullshit.
Dielectric permittivity, magnetic permeability, and capacitance resistance.
Fine, you know, stuff moves through stuff drags through stuff, whatever, but, you know, the point is it creates pressure. Stuff admits stuff, and the stuff it's admitting pressurizes the fields around other things, the environment around it. The field is made out of stuff, and the stuff has magnitude. Okay, it doesn't have no magnitude. It's not nothing, it's certainly a something. And if you don't want to call it a particle, fine, but the bits of force clearly interact with the bits of matter, and they cause the arrangements we are familiar with.
There is only force and motion, inertia, and acceleration.
Yes, there's force, which is the little bits. There's motion, which we see in the big bits, because we can't see the little bits moving. Okay. Something in acceleration, inertia. Well, inertia is a totally misused word here. Yes, everything has a condition of motion, but yeah, duh. And it may change through acceleration into some other motion. But acceleration is just motion. That's all it really is. It's the way you acquire motion, and whether you keep the motion and obtain a velocity is dependent on your structure, your material structure. If you don't have the material structure for it, like electrons, then you won't gain velocity. You'll just have to be constantly accelerated. Electrons have to be constantly accelerated to go somewhere. If you stop accelerating them, if you stop pushing them, they stop moving.
These are the conjugate pressure field modalities of the ether as extant and expressed in the point source coherent state.
Okay, point source coherent state. Again, all that doesn't mean anything. There's point source only has to do with spherical geometry. And once you leave spherical geometry, your point source argument starts to evaporate. So, and nothing is a point source in the fact that nothing really radiates the little things, okay, electrons or something. They don't radiate in all directions. They're doing specific things, interacting with each other like magnets.
Of the toroid and the hyperboloid.
Well, these things have nothing to do with anything, so I don't know if it's worth playing any more of the hyperboloid. I've pointed out before that this idea of motion would be detectable. So I'll do a last little brief drawing on this and be safe. We'll see. It's enough. You know, besides, there's no point in arguing something for which there's no evidence. Until somebody shows up with some evidence, I really don't have to, you know, I mean, it's really not an argument that has to be dealt with because it's not one based on anything called evidence. So they have a mathematical contrivance. That they give this whole right-hand rule, and they give magnets streams of energy going around them, and streams of something, whatever it would be. So they have this notion that something comes out of this and flows down to this, so that this has a motion to it, this field line. And as I've explained, the field line is really just a representation of the points of where you're getting hit by how much of the two kinds of energy. So these are the only way you can identify the field is to put a magnet in it. I'm sorry. Gotta get that. How'd that get so far? I usually hit it with my hand in some kind of rude manner. So I'll put it there. So this should have been red. And so all you're really talking about is the balance of the force. So if there was a magnet in this location, what would it feel, okay, in terms of how much repulsion from this side to the red side, and then this is the black side, let's say. and then the attraction from to this side, and that'll decide how the magnet will turn. Now, if the magnet had a choice, what it'll do is it'll always flip. So if the magnet was facing this way, you know, the negative, positive end were reversed, the magnet would flip, because this would be repulsive and this would be repulsive. And by percentages, if I was closer to this end than I was this end, you could understand that this force would be stronger than this repulsive force, therefore the magnet would flip. And as it flipped, then these attractive forces would kick in and the magnet would be pulled into the magnet. So the only way you see these field lines is to create a barrier that prevents the little magnets from going to the magnet. But they just represent positions that a magnet would take. And so obviously the position at the top here, to be the most comfortable, the magnet would be arranged exactly opposite. Okay, it would be arranged. This would be the red, and this would be the black. It would arrange itself that way because now it has no repulsion here, and the red is completely hidden from exposure. The red force can't get to it, so there's no repulsion. And if you tilted it a little, then there would be this strong repulsion that says, no, go back up. So yes, the magnets are going to point in the direction as they go around, which is the balance of the amount of force hitting them. Alright, they're going to, but there's no motion. Nothing's, the little fragments aren't moving. So you see that in a ferrocell. The little fragments aren't moving. They're not. You don't see flow. You don't see any movement. Nothing's moving here. And what's really happening, the only thing that's really happening to a magnet is, you know, as I've simply drawn 4 million times, that didn't work. Paper. Cooperate, please. Okay, is that the mixed force comes in. Figure out a better way to do this quickly. And it comes out segregated. That is, all the red comes out here and all the black comes out here. And that happens all the way around the magnet. There's force coming in this side and it comes out all that side, all even. So it just filters. That's all this is. It's a filter. It just filters the force, segregates the two elements, the proton repulsive force and the electron repulsive force, and that's essentially a reflection of what the charged elements are doing in reality. Charged elements are doing that. Charged elements, force comes in and they and it comes out differently. So if the red hits an electron, it goes out perpendicularly. If it's a black force, then it reflects. And those are the simple rules. And with those simple rules, you have a very different effect when a red or a black hits one of those charged elements. So the charged element is just acting as a filter. It doesn't create a force. It doesn't make something do all kinds of stuff. It just filters a force. And once the force is filtered, then it can affect the external world in dramatically different ways because there's a different balance of force. There's an imbalance. There's more red coming at me because something, you know, filtered it into my direction, or it was reflected. And depending on your configuration, if you're a magnet and you're the wrong side or the right side, it makes a huge difference whether you're going to be attractive or repulsive. So anyway, it's just not. You know, this diagram is just fits so well, and I just don't know why there's so much obnoxious resistance to accepting that this is a really viable explanation of how the underlying mechanism works. So anyway, so I think that's enough, and so until next time and such, so forth and whatnot. If there's anything to add, I mean, as always, you know, if anyone is interested in attempting a dialogue defending either ether theory, I suppose, I really don't want to do that, but okay, or conventional physics, yes, I'd be interested. Because, you know, it's got to be someone who's not a coward, okay, who does all these pronouncements about they know what the truth is. They have the truth. They're the God of truth. And they're afraid, okay, of defeating their adversaries. They're afraid of the battle because somehow their complete annihilation and destruction of me, they're going to cut my head off. They're going to just totally denut me somehow in this confrontation because they're so superior. And they don't want to do that? Just for the fun of their audience, they don't want to annihilate me? No. I think they're afraid. Okay, that's the obvious answer. Bok, 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 bok. Ken Wheeler is officially the fattest chicken on earth. Yes, biggest chicken. Overall mass of chicken.